self-help books, dieting, 99% of that is all bullshit. And the reason I say that is because it focuses on a fundamental flaw. It focuses on the individual and it neglects to take into consideration the effect that the environment is having on the individual. I'm a firm believer that I think that we've been focusing on the wrong side of the equation for a long period of time. We've constantly been focusing on the individual and how the individual can be better in any given situation, because that's what we can control. We can't control the environment, and I totally understand that. You know, they say you can't control your environment, you can't change your environment, you can only change your reaction to that. But what if we started to think differently? What if we started to think, well, how can we create better environments for other people to succeed? So instead of focusing on ourselves, we started to think about how we could be better for other people. I use the example of mental health. So when someone's struggling with a mental health issue, it's always up to them to learn how to talk about their feelings, to come up with coping strategies, to figure things out for themselves. But what if instead we focused on how other people could be there for them, how other people could learn to listen to whatever it is that they're talking about, to validate their feelings, to be non-judgmental and non-reactive. And I think, being vulnerable is great, but how much easier is it to be vulnerable in a safe environment? But again, we don't focus on that. We focus on the individual and how the individual needs to be brave and to be a leader and take a risk and all of this kind of stuff. But again, if the environment is toxic, it doesn't matter how much you work on yourself. You're still going to be affected by your environment. You could be the most enlightened, happiest person, and then you get put into a toxic environment, and I guarantee you that environment will have an effect on you, and it'll start to bring out the worst in you. Just look at Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, where he had guards and prisoners put into an experiment, and they essentially internalized those roles. It didn't matter how good they were as people, the power of the situation affected them. And that's the same for everything that we do in life, and yet none of these self-help books take that into consideration. The responsibility is always on you. And I'm a firm believer, yes, take accountability, but how about we start taking accountability for creating better environments for the people around us? We talk about how to be leaders, but how do you be a leader and how do you lead when you're in an environment in which it doesn't support you to do whatever it is that needs to be done? You might have a boss that undermines you. How do you lead then? No one talks about that. It's always like, oh, well, this is what you need to do and this is how to be a great leader, but it neglects the context of the situation. I'll use the example with soccer, for instance. So you might be working with a sports psych or a mental coach in a team sport, and they'll tell you, you got to focus on your thinking, you got to be positive, you got to visualize yourself scoring goals or whatever it is. Now, don't get me wrong, there's probably benefit to that, but that benefit, you might only see improvement in your game to 10 to 15%. Now, what if instead you started to focus on the team and the environment in which that individual is operating under, and you created a safe environment for that player to make mistakes? Now, all of a sudden, that player will improve by 50, 60, 70% because they're encouraged to make mistakes. We have a problem in society that we reprimand kids for making mistakes. I realized this when I was coaching. When I coached in America, it took me 2, 3, maybe 4 months before I had any effect on these kids, because I had to decondition what they had associated with mistakes. And what I mean by that is, mistakes at home, mistakes at school, whatever it is, that they would get punished for it. And because of that, they associated mistakes with something bad. Now, here I was trying to teach them new skills in soccer, and they would make a mistake and they would internalize and think that they were the worst player in the world. And so I had to continue to positively reinforce what they were doing and encourage them to make mistakes so that they could actually improve. And yes, in those 3 to 4 months, I did see improvement. Now, I could have worked on them individually and talk about their mental state, don't internalize when you make mistakes and whatever else, but I wouldn't have seen the improvement I did because I created that safe environment. And I changed my focus of intention, instead of the individual, to the situation that they were in. I think that, positive reinforcement is the gift for safety. And not yelling when someone makes mistakes, because no one goes out there to intentionally make mistakes. And if we can go through life thinking that and understanding that no one is out there to intentionally fuck up, because I guarantee you no one is. No one enjoys it. And yet we think that people do that. People don't know what they don't know. They are trying their best at all times. So I guess my thing is that self-help books, dieting, all of that, it's focusing on the individual. And why is it doing that? Well, because it's profitable. You know, these self-help books, the dieting industry, they're billion-dollar industries, and they make a fortune off of it because it's not lasting. And it still doesn't change the fact that you could be the most enlightened individual, as I said before, going into any environment, and that environment is still going to affect you, regardless of how spiritual or awakened you are. And so instead of focusing on the individual, I think that we could have so much more lasting effects if we focused on the environment, creating environments in which people feel safe. And we do that through non-judgment, non-reaction, and through positive reinforcement. And it's going to take time. And having that understanding that everyone is trying their best at any given time is fundamental in creating that safe environment. So again, when we focus on ourselves, and I remember reading this from Johann Hari in Lost Connections, that the problem in the Western world is that we focus so much on ourselves, you know, with self-help books, with whatever it is, and self-improvement. And that's the recipe for depression. And yet there's a billion-dollar industry for it. Doesn't make sense. Well, it does actually. But so instead of focusing on how you can be better, what if instead we focused on how you could be better for others? How can you contribute to making a better environment in which your peers, your co-workers, whoever else it is, can succeed? And again, I'll reinforce that it comes back down to non-judgment, non-reaction, and positive reinforcement, and that understanding that everyone is trying their best at every single moment in their life. Anyway, any thoughts, feedbacks, or questions on anything that I've said? Much appreciated. Thanks.